what pooling means for mineral owners. It's not a lawsuit. It looks like a lawsuit, but you're not being sued. So what is it? And off we go. Okay, so what usually happens is, and this is the common story that I get, is people who maybe you don't have a ton of minerals to where this is not a common occurrence. And I see this all over on the Mineral Rights Forum, people getting these things in the mail, these big packets. It is a pooling packet that you get in the mail from the Oklahoma Corporation Commission process that looks like a lawsuit. It's a legal document, but it's an application to pool every owner in a drilling unit. And that probably, if you've never heard those words before, that doesn't mean anything to you, but just keep that here and we'll continue. So why you got it is that you own minerals somewhere in a box that they're wanting to put a well. So somewhere in that box, someone wants to drill a well and they're trying to get everyone in that box to agree to drilling that well. However, not everyone has signed an agreement. So this is the thing they do if not everyone has signed an agreement. So you're not selling your minerals, you still have your minerals, you're not having to let go of your minerals, but it does affect the amount of income that you're going to get. So we'll go into that a little more. Okay. So what's in the packet is you have the case number for the commission, what relief they've sought. Oh, I should put ahead of time, I am not an attorney. I'm not a legal person. I'm an engineer. You are watching this free on the internet right now. You get what you pay for. So on the first page, you'll see something like this where you have the applicant, like what company is asking for it, what relief is sought, like what are they asking to do, what's the legal description of the lands that they're wanting to do this on. The cause number and the order number are good things to keep in mind because this is how you can look it up later and figure out what actually happened and reference it. The date and place and time and the order of the commission is what you're looking for. So there's going to be a lot of filings if you look up the cause and the order, but the actual final order is the one that matters because they have to present a bunch of cases and stuff. So let me move this to where it's smaller. This, and just as a side note, this is from 2011. They look very similar nowadays. Okay, you'll have the exhibit, which has the names of all the respondents. If a name is not on the respondents list on the back of, like, it'll have a whole bunch of names and addresses. It just means that they're leased. It doesn't mean that they're not an owner in that well. It just means that they're not an owner that's having to go through this process. And then what formation, what spacing order, we'll talk about what those things mean. What authority do they have to do this? And then what attorney? I mean, that's the legal part of there. So I do want to back up a little bit because what exactly are we talking about? So a well, when it's drilled, has a certain amount of drainage that is expected to be drained from the reservoir. And anyone who has minerals in that box of land should be paid for the minerals that are being extracted from that land. And that is called the spacing unit or the drilling unit, or there's several different terms. Now, when we're talking about wells, modern wells can be drilled. There's 4-mile laterals. So a 4-mile well would be stretching all the way across 4 of these sections. Historically, only 640 acres, which is one of these sections, has been pooled together. But what happens if you have a well that's drilled? How do they even drill wells that are 4 miles long? A more typical well is 2 miles long, and so that would be 2 of these sections together. But even still, you still have to get permission to do that. And so how are they doing that? And that's how pooling comes in. If I go back to the desktop and I turn on the wells, in this particular area, they've done only 1-mile laterals. This map is showing red wells are shut in. And so this is meaning that this well stopped producing in 2024. However, if I zoom out, you'll start to see that this is kind of a typical pattern where they've drilled one well in some of these areas. But if I go to some of these other more developed areas, with each one of these lines being a well going through the reservoir and draining all across the line, you see ones that stretch across the entire 2 miles. So that's what modern wells typically you'll see a pooling order for something that includes 2 sections, not just one, is what that comes down to. There are rules that the Oklahoma Commission has in place. However, the name of the game is really just getting approvals to do things that you need to do, whether or not it's following existing rules or if you're having to get clearances to do it. And these are all the non-legal terms for it. But that's basically what the operators are doing. They're saying, we want to do this for the benefit of the reservoir, for the benefit of all the owners of the reservoir. And can we pretty please do that? Now, the unit sizes are rules that the commission has put into place in order to help the commission decide quicker if that's something that can just be quickly approved or if it's a weird thing that needs to have like special approval. So oil above 4,000 feet deep has a 40-acre max unit size. Oil from 4,000 to 10,000 feet deep has an 80-acre max size. Oil below 10,000 feet has 160 acres max size. And you might be thinking, what? We were just talking about 640 acres. My pooling order has a 1280 acre. That's way bigger than those. And that's because there are horizontal well tolerances, and a lot of the horizontal wells are considered gas wells. There's a lot. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's rules, but then there's almost always the exception. And that's how they end up doing what they need to do. So, if you're looking at how to view this, though, is if you're looking at an older vertical well, you're probably looking at something that has a much smaller unit, a much smaller pooled, and a much smaller acreage bit that's being drained, and a much smaller stamp of footprint of the owners who are being paid than these newer wells, which have much bigger units. Okay, why is this? So, like I said, they are trying to do things the most efficient way possible. So the commission, and this is their words, to avoid the drilling of unnecessary wells or to protect correlative rights shall, blah, 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 require such owners to pool and develop their lands in the spacing unit as a unit. So kind of make everybody play along for the benefit of everybody. That's basically what it's saying. Different states go about this different ways. So, for example, in Texas, pooling is something that is common. And you might be thinking, well, we don't have these orders that go out in Texas nearly as often. Maybe you have minerals in both Texas and Oklahoma, and you don't see this in Texas like you do in Oklahoma. And that's because Texas has a different way to go about protecting the development of the reservoir and the protection of the mineral owners and the state lands. And typically, it's so this goes back to our warm-up question, actually. So our warm-up question was, is pooling and forced pooling the same thing? And Fred, I see you answered and said, no. It sounds like forced pooling doesn't give you any options. So yes and no. Forced pooling doesn't give you an option not to pool, but it does give you options on how you're being pooled. So yes, pooling itself is more of an umbrella term for all the different types of pooling that can be done. So in Texas, the equivalent of forced pooling, where the state is forcing this pooling to happen, is a MIPA, M-I-P-A well. So if you ever see MIPA in the well name, that means that there was a forced pooling enacted for that particular well, but it's not common in Texas. It's usually like the last ditch effort, and normal poolings, and we'll just say voluntary poolings, are more normal, where you get all the owners to agree to pool their lands, and that's how they're being paid, as opposed to it being a forced thing. While in Oklahoma, it's kind of the default. The default is to forced pool. And I would actually say it's probably more of an issue of people just going, companies just checking the box exercises when it comes to trying to actually lease and going any other route. And forced pooling is just kind of the default. So that's why it's such a big topic in Oklahoma versus any other state. Since the point of a pooling order is to help the lands actually be developed in an effective and efficient way, there is a timeline to this. It's not just a once we get everybody to agree situation. There's actual like rules and timelines, and it does sometimes take a long time to get through the whole process. However, once you get through the process, each step has a very short timeline. So that's why it's good to keep up with what's happening on your lands, because you might not have much time to respond in order to have full control over what's actually happening with your minerals. So it starts with the application. Then there's a notice. And the notice happens 15 days at least before the hearing. Then there's the hearing where the judge hears all of the reasons. And then there's the actual order. Now, there could be a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes when it comes to all the stuff ahead of time, because that's where some of the drama, the tea of behind the scenes is kind of fun to guess what's happening. And I've been part of that side of it where you're kind of fighting to see who gets the right to drill the well and who gets the pool and how it works. So like I said, they have to try to find you first. That's part of the hearing, is they're making sure that there was an attempt to lease all owners. And if that attempt was not done, if you can't prove that you attempted it, then that's the judge is like, no, you got to at least try. Come on. Like, you have to have due diligence to try to find all the owners. And the point of forced pooling, it's a fallback in case they can't find all the owners, or in case they can't get somebody to cooperate or respond. The forced pooling allows development to still happen, even if there's one person within half an acre in the corner of a section that says no, because otherwise they're taking stuff from the public without permission. So there has to be some guiding rule around how this is being governed, but they have to make an attempt to go through normal processes first. So that's the first part of it, and that's part of the hearing. And that's also, you should receive something, especially if they have your address. You should receive some communication from somebody. However, like I said, it's becoming more of the default. So they might make a weak attempt to contact you and then go straight to the pooling. So the hearing in your voice, though, you can protest it if you're like, whoa. They know exactly how to contact me. They have not tried to contact me. Or I was legitimately trying to negotiate a better lease and they just ignored me flat out. You can go and protest. You can say, no, they weren't listening to me. They ignored me. Here's all my attempts to contact them to try to lease. And they said, no, we don't. And I was being reasonable and they weren't being reasonable. It has to be a reasonable attempt to create a contract between the owners of the property before the government can come in and say, no, you have to give your this forced pooling here. Yeah. Okay. So then the order arrives, and this is after they decide who is the operator, what lands are being pooled, what depths are being pooled, what wells are being proposed. And the drama kind of behind some of that is really you just have to have a little toehold of interest in that section in order to propose a well. And then once you propose a well, you have to prove that you're the best operator for that particular part of land. So nobody else is wanting to drill a well that has more claim to that section than you do. Maybe the other operators, because there's, and I know that this is getting into the weeds, but just letting you know that there's sometimes fighting that's happening behind the scenes between two different companies that are trying to control that section of land. So if you're getting two competing leasing offers, or if you see two different company names in the hearing and the orders and all those things, that's probably what's going on, is they're competing to see who gets the rights to drill that well. Okay. The operator has to commence the well in 180 or about a year, 180 days or a year. It will say that in the term. And it will also give you a menu of things to select from. So that's also the thing to recognize is that the order date starts your election clock, not the day it reaches your mailbox, which is rough because it's a really short clock. So your election, here's the part that scares people because it says you have to do something and none of this stuff makes sense to most people. So normally, so these are all example offerings. But normally there's about 4 selections that you can choose from. You can participate in the well, which means they'll say you have the right to take your interest and pony up money that's your share of the well to help drill the well, and then you'll get your full share of the revenue also. So full cost, full revenue. If there's companies that make a full strategy out of doing this, it's called being a non-operating participating partner in the well. Most mineral owners aren't in the camp of, yes, I'd love to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to drill a well that I have no information on and no background and education on why or what they're doing. So most people are not in that category. And so it's usually an intentional decision if you decide to participate in the well. And for that reason, it is never going to be the default that they choose for you. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, if I don't respond, I'm going to have to participate. That's not the default. Then usually the next three options are, all right, we're going to assume you don't want to give us a bunch of money to drill this well. And we're going to assume that you would much rather just have us drill the well for you and then pay you a royalty. So the opportunity to do that is the bonus. And then the royalty is the percentage that you get off of anything the well makes. So those are the two numbers that you really have to know going into this, is that it's going to be how much you get up front and then how much you get over the life of the well. So usually there's a 1/8 royalty and then a higher bonus. This one's going to be the default that the state will choose for you if you don't respond. So this is the most important one to pay attention to, and it should specify which one is the default. But it's almost always, and I just say almost because I haven't seen every single one of them out there, the lowest royalty and the highest bonus will be the default. So you get the most cash up front and the smallest royalty share over the life of all the future wells in that section for that depth. And then they'll give you kind of a selection of other options. So you'll get either a smaller bonus with a slightly higher royalty, and then usually 20% or 25% is the top that they'll offer. In less active parts of the country, they might top out around 18 3/4, but usually 20%, 25%, or a fifth or a fourth royalty is the highest royalty that will be offered, and then either a small bonus or no bonus sometimes. So those numbers, it will go into what specifically, like when does it make sense to choose one versus the other. We'll have a full walkthrough after this. Okay, so participating, again, that means you're investing. Be very aware of what you're doing before you select to invest and participate. And then also know that if you participate in the first well, you have to participate in the next well. And then if you ever elect not to participate in a well, you're out for the rest of the wells. So it's like an ongoing commitment or else you're out. So it's a working interest ownership. You should just really know what you're doing before anyone gets into any type of working interest situation. The bonus and the royalty seesaw, that is what we're mostly going to be digging into, is when do you want a bigger bonus and when do you want a bigger royalty? Because typically, if you give anyone the option, I want more money up front. But if you look at any of our recommendations and a lot of recommendations online, they'll say, oh, always pick the bigger royalty. It's not quite as clear cut as that. However, those are good rules of thumb. If you need more cash now, bigger bonus, yes. However, overall, the life of the wells, it will probably be better to pick the bigger royalty. Okay. This is the problem that people get into, though, is that there's only 20 days from the date of the order to the responding. And that's not very long if you consider even just, I don't know. I know I don't check my mail every day. like just mailboxes just aren't the most common form of communication anymore. So just be aware if you do get something in the mail, check the date that they had on the order, because that's when the clock started. Okay, to deliver your election, it needs to be in writing to the named party. It's the postmark that matters. It goes to the next regular mail day. Keep the proof. This is always good in general whenever you're dealing with any of oil and gas situations. Like, always keep a written record of what you did. Always keep a postmark trail. Keep things in writing. Those are just good rules of thumb, But like I said, if you do nothing, you're deemed to have elected the smallest royalty with the largest bonus. But just real quick, you can still sign a lease. Just because the pooling has gone out doesn't mean you can't sign a lease. It just means that you have to move quick. And signing the lease during the window makes the lease govern things rather than the pooling order. After the order, it doesn't take your minerals, like I said, it just affects how they pay you and what they pay you. It doesn't let the lease bonus vanish, so they owe you that whether or not they drill the well, and it doesn't run forever. So they only have that certain amount of time to drill that well, or else that pooling order goes away, right? Okay, so when the money shows up is based on your selection, you'll get a bonus. And then the next bit of it, the royalty, might be a long time from now. Like it might be a year plus, it might be never if they never drill the well. But the order will say how long they have to commence a well. And then once they start drilling the well, my rule of thumb is 6 to 12 months that you might see the first check after they start drilling the well, just between completing it and getting it producing and getting all the division orders sent out and figured out. And then that first check to come in the mail is usually a long window of time. Okay, and again, if they don't drill the well, they still have to pay the bonuses. Again, if you're just going to take away 4 things from this, look for the date of the order, what calendar day is the 20th day, what exact bonus and royalty pairs are on that particular order's menu, because they're all different. Is there a lease offer that I've been presented that I haven't decided on? Because if they've offered it, that's still on the table until that order is played out. And then who is the Oklahoma oil and gas attorney for that election? So those are the things, because that's ultimately who you'd need to talk to. And this is a pooling election trade-off spreadsheet so you can put in how many net mineral acres you own in the unit. And this assumes that this is the net interest. So if it's that you're, maybe for this example, you knew that Sylvia had 40 acres and there's 10 cousins that all got it split equally, then you would put in 4 net acres. If you're Sylvia putting this in and you have all the acreage still, like hasn't been split any, then you put in 40. And then you put in the spacing size for the unit. So, this is the 1280 pooling. I want to know what the numbers look like for this. And then this will tell you, you have about a 3% share of the money that is of that well. Now, of any well drilled in that. And then you can go into, you can kind of ignore all this stuff. But what matters is what really this comes down to is how many wells do you expect to be drilled in that section? And that is the ultimate thesis, is that if you expect wells to be drilled at all in that section, you should pick the higher royalty. If you don't expect wells to be drilled, or you think that they're just pooling it for, they're just trying to get land because they're flipping, or they're not going to really drill a great well, they're just going to drill like a little dinky well to hold the land, and this is not like a long-term thing. Well, then that's when it gets a little more interesting as to which one to choose, because almost all the time, if you put in the election and the acreage, almost all of these deals will work out to where the amount that you're paid in bonus plus today's value of the future royalties will be greater if you choose the higher royalty, unless I reduce the number of wells to 0. If I reduce the number of wells to 0, then the numbers change. So almost all the time, unless you're expecting no wells to be drilled, if I put on even just 1 well right here, so if I expect 1 well, then the 12.5, the default royalty is not going to be, if this is the total value to you on today's dollars, not like tomorrow's dollars added up and blah, blah, blah. Today's value of those dollars is almost never going to be better to take the default. And that's really my issue with this, is that the default that most people get is not the best case, since the whole point of pooling is so they can drill a well. So most of the time they're going to be drilling a well. You're going to be in one of these situations here where something higher then a 12.5% royalty is better. And then if I, like a lot of these sections, 4 wells are drilled. So even if I just go up to 2 wells, like this math gets dramatically better for the higher royalty, because the more wells that are drilled, the more royalties you'll be owed. And that bonus is just a one-time thing, but the royalties compound, and they if you have 8 wells drilled, you'll get 8 times that, rather than just the 1 well. While you never get 8 times the bonus if they drill 8 wells. Okay, but what this is showing is this orange line is the highest royalty rate, while this light purple line is the lowest royalty rate. So this is the default, and this is using very typical. So what I plugged in here is a Woodford oily well, which is kind of a like best case, not best case scenario, but typical. If people are drilling in Oklahoma, they're probably drilling this type of well or better. So again, if they're just going to drill 1 well, if it's just a step out situation, if it's not, we recently did one where in the Western Anadarko Basin over towards where the Cherokee stuff was being drilled, the Cherokee is only being developed at 2 wells per section most of the time. So at most, they'd be drilling 2 wells. Then it gets a little more, okay, which one do I choose? And that particular acreage, it was kind of outside of the main play. And so, well, what if they only drill 1? Well, if they only drill 1, I don't know. Like that particular one, it was more of a toss-up on what the best option was. And so that's where you talk it over with your advisors, talk it over with your CPA, look into the long-term effects of this, talk to an attorney about the lease terms, look at the post-production costs. Like there's a lot of other things that come into play if you're looking at just 1 well. However, most of the time that's not going to be the case. But you have the operator's value here. The operator will always have a better value if you choose the lower royalty rate, because they are planning on drilling wells, and that lease bonus really doesn't affect them nearly as much as it affects you. So just know that it's going to be a worse deal for them to pay you a higher royalty, which is why it's a better deal for you most of the time.